Afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. Happy Mandela Day as well, actually. So, we're going to be discussing one particular aspect of the electoral reforms. I did a video on it yesterday where I discussed everything that we know that's in it. It was quite a long video. Some of you may have seen that. I'll tell you what's interesting. So, I'm going to come to some of the comments really quite quickly here. But what's interesting, I'll just show you a smattering of the way it's been reported today. I can't remember which is which, not that one. There we go. These are some newspapers. Now, this is actually fairly typical in a way, in that all of the front pages that talk about it at all, which is most of them, talk about the voting age being reduced to 16, which, remember, is no great surprise. It was in the manifesto. So that was actually the one thing in this bill that was not even remotely a surprise. Labour did also promise to clamp down on foreign money in politics, but nonetheless the specific provisions are more of a surprise. So what you notice here is, and this is the point, in fact, someone's just said there about Labour comms, SG's just said there about Labour comms, which is dead right. Labour must improve their communications. If they want no further evidence, look at this. What is this, right? Every single news outlet is reporting on the 16 and 17-year-olds getting the vote. Why? Because that's controversial. That divides opinion. Some people think it should happen. Some people think it shouldn't happen. None of them are leading on the... And this is, by the way, no great impact. We're going to discuss the impact. But remember, there are only so many 16 and 17-year-olds. And younger people tend not to vote in larger numbers anyway. They are the least, they vote in the smallest numbers. There's literally a direct correlation between age and your likelihood to vote. So this is not going to swing, no matter who it favours, even any, well, you sometimes get very, very, very tight elections. Yes, it'll swing those. If it comes down to like 100 votes or fewer, yeah, okay, it could swing that. But really nothing else. It won't have a material impact on overall elections. But what will have a material impact on the way political parties can behave is the clamping down on foreign donations. Where's that? That's the big feature of this bill. Where is it? It's not on the front pages. Why? Because that would be universally popular. And this is the point that Labour need to get through to their heads. Right? Give the papers a choice of something to report on, and they'll report on something that divides the public. Even the Mirror. The Mirror is Labour supporting, but they've still gone with that. Why? Because it's controversial. Clamping down on foreign donations isn't controversial, it's supported. But because the mainstream media aren't talking about it in any great detail, the public may never know about it. But anyway, let us go through this. Let's look at the different takes. So this is a range of takes. There are other papers that did the same thing, but these are the four. So the Mirror just goes with 16-year-olds to vote in the next election, right? They're generally Labour supporting. They're going to report on it. I haven't read any of these articles, by the way, but that's probably going to be fairly supportive. The Daily Telegraph say votes at 16 as Starmer panics over reform. However, it was in the manifesto. So, in fact, Labour have had a policy of votes at 16 since 2010 because it was in their manifesto under Gordon Brown, but they lost that election, right? But Labour have had it as a policy for like 15 years, which means they've had it as a policy long before we even, well, certainly before most people knew who Nigel Farage was, and over a decade before Reform UK were a thing, or about a decade before Reform UK were a thing. So that's, again, they're reporting it as, oh, Labour are just trying to gain some advantage, but they'd already said that they were going to do this. The I paper there saying UK gives the vote to teens aged 16. I don't know of any people aged 16, by the way, who aren't teens, so I'm not sure what that's about. With Reform and Corbyn likely to benefit. Now, Corbyn would, yes, the Corbyn party would absolutely benefit. Reform will not, as I'll show you in a moment. They will certainly not, and I will come to a comment that someone made there, they will not gain. But I will give a caveat to that. Then the Daily Express saying Labour in for nasty voter surprise. So they're quoting Nigel Farage as saying this will backfire on Labour. but will it really? So I'll just come to a couple of comments before I go on to how it is likely to impact elections. Dave, they're saying Farage might be right, but tic tac follows do not necessarily translate to voters. Well, this is he's not right at all. He's fundamentally not at all right. But Dave, they're saying in general, though, it'd be interesting to see what all the main parties will do to attract 16, 17-year-old votes in the upcoming general election. So that's an interesting point. Will anyone specifically target 16 and 17-year-olds? They should. They're not going to be a huge block. Don't expect massive efforts. Generally speaking, I keep saying to young people, when I was a teacher, I could say to young people, the reason why, and I would just urge them to vote. I didn't urge them, as some people claim, to vote a particular way. I just urged them to vote. And I say, even if you don't want to vote for someone, just spoil your ballot because you'll count as voting still. And the reason why, if you don't feel that politicians are really putting a lot of emphasis into the policies they have will benefit the young. Now, I could point out a long list of policies that Labour have which are going to improve lives for young people, right? Including boosting the minimum wage. They're going to get rid of the age bands for minimum wage, so there'll be a massive boost to the minimum wage for young people before the end of this Parliament. And of course, the youth community hubs and things like that, and mental health provision. I mean, it's really badly behind, but Labour are loading that onto young people first. They're developing mental health support for young people first. So there's quite a lot of stuff for young people. But young people won't necessarily know about this because it's not the stuff they shout about. Why? Because young people don't swing elections. They don't vote in large enough numbers. And usually when they do vote, they vote very consistently. You don't want to be a consistent voter if you want to determine outcome of elections. But there was a comment, someone here. Hold on, let me just have a look. Can I find it now? Oh, here we go. I was talking to my 14-year-old about this, and she reckons that at least 50% of the boys in her class will vote Reform. So, I mean, she might be in a bit of a thick class. That's unfortunate. By and large, this won't happen. There are pockets of the country that are very reformy. What I would suggest is in those pockets of the country, you're not going to see a higher proportion of 16, 17-year-olds voting Reform than they would for the rest of the ages. And if they only vote in the same proportion as other age groups, it's not actually a benefit to Reform UK at all. But let me just show you. This is from the latest YouGov polling survey, which again has got Labour falling behind and Reform going ahead a little bit there, seesawing a bit, but Reform very definitely ahead. But what you can see here, if we look at the 18 to 24-year-old group, now there isn't one for 16, 17-year-olds because no one polls 16, 17-year-olds. That may begin quite soon because after all, if you're doing a general election voting intention poll, why wouldn't you include 16 and 17-year-olds now that you know that they are going to be voting in the next general election? So it might be interesting to see how quickly pollsters cotton onto this, because remember, this is voting intent. This is general election voting intention. So it's supposed to be how you're going to vote at the next general election. 16, 17-year-olds get a vote, right? But so the best we can go on is the 18 to 24-year-old group. You know, that's all we have to go on. Now, what you can see here, amongst this age group, and this is at the moment, remember, this is with Labour not polling very well at all. And yet 28% would still vote Labour to 8% of Reform UK. So there is a myth that Reform UK is attracting a lot of young lads in particular. It is a myth. All the polling shows it's a complete myth. There has been no increase in the number of young people voting right wing at all in the last few years. Not a single shift. All that's happened is some of the ones who would have said they'd vote Conservative are now saying they'll vote Reform UK. Now, that doesn't mean to say we can dismiss completely Reform UK with this policy, because two things. First of all, this is a national voting intention. It's over a whole country. There are pockets of particularly strong Reform UK support. And also, there's, you know, you could argue that Reform UK might better enthuse people to go out and vote. But talking about, Jeremy Corbyn, the fact that the Jeremy Corbyn party would also benefit from this, I'll just point this out. So a lot of people would say when Jeremy Corbyn was Labour leader that he really enthused young people. He had all that chanting at Glastonbury and stuff like that. Oh, he really spoke to the young people, stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, you would say a lot of young people approved of Jeremy Corbyn, but they didn't vote for him. Not in any greater numbers than they did just before him or since him, right? So although you would certainly say that Jeremy Corbyn, appealed to young people as an individual, he didn't persuade them to vote for him in greater numbers. And the same polling is finding very much the same for Nigel Farage. Your daughter, for example, may have gone around a load of lads who, by the way, will not be able to... I mean, they will be able to vote in the next general election, because the next general election will be at least 3 years away, and possibly 4, but at least 3 years away. So they will be voting. But I'll just say the same thing here. Just like voting intention polls mid-term, they're interesting, but they don't really tell you how people are going to vote for two reasons. First of all, things change. But second of all, people's mindset is very different. When you talk about tightening of the polls and things like that, what you're really talking about, because they sometimes don't always tighten, sometimes they widen. But what you're really talking about is voters change their mindset once an election's been called. So in the here and now, when there is no election, a lot of people think in terms of which party most appeals to them, and that's what they'll put down on a poll like this. But when it comes to an actual election, some people still do that, of course, but there are a significant number of people who do vote pragmatically, and they think to themselves, if I'm going to go to the polling station, I'm going to, go to the trouble of voting. How can I best use my vote? Now, I'm not saying it's the default position that loads and loads of people tactically vote, but they do think about it a bit more. They do think about the practical upshot of it. Some people don't. Some people are just going to vote for their party regardless. But some of them do think, which one's really going to be best for me? So I would suggest, and all the polling would suggest, Reform UK do not gain from this, and that is why Richard Tice yesterday said he opposes it. They will try and claim it's because of some spurious reasons, right? But note that Tice didn't actually give a reason yesterday. He just said he's opposed to it. He said that even some 16, 17-year-olds are opposed to it, which may be true. But he didn't say why he was opposed to it. It's the same thing. And the idea that Reform UK would do it, be opposed to it altruistically, is a nonsense, because remember, after the election they were in favour of proportional representation. Speaking in favour of proportional representation, Richard Tice, Nigel Farage, both of them said that their party's policy was proportional representation. It's not anymore, is it? It's first past the post now. Why? Because the parliamentary arithmetic has changed. If the parliamentary arithmetic changes back, if at the next election they win a good chunk of votes, 15%, maybe 20%, who knows? And they only get, again, a handful of seats. Maybe they get a few dozen seats, right? They'll be back to wanting proportional representation, I'll bet your ass. But anyway, I'll catch up with some comments. The American experience was that young voters, especially males, did turn out and vote largely for Trump. I'd have to double check on that, but I would be surprised. I would be surprised. Because in America as well, generally young people don't turn out to vote. I'll not check that live because that could take a little while. Punator, they're saying, I say votes should be weighted by expected life expectancy. Under 25, 3 votes. 26 to 52 votes. Over 50, half a vote. I mean, you can always make an argument for any system of voting. Yeah, you could say, because elderly people don't have to suffer the long-term consequence of your vote, yeah, it shouldn't count. But obviously, yeah, that's not going to happen. I mean, there is another thing as well. So, as recently as 2023, Labour had a formal policy of not just votes for 16, 70%, it's not playing with things, but also allowing EU citizens who'd been settled here for at least 5 years to vote, which I am also in favour of. My attitude is, if you live here and you pay your taxes, and if you're a foreign national, you pay more taxes. If you do the same job as a British national, you pay more taxes because you pay the NHS surcharge. So, you know, you're paying higher taxes as well. You should really get a vote. Now, because it's not standard across the world for migrants to vote at all, in fact, we're actually technically more progressive on this, because migrants can vote in local elections and other like similar elections, and Commonwealth citizens can vote in general elections. So an Australian can vote in a general election. But here's my argument. Why should an Australian who's not even settled here, they're living here temporarily, but they're just here for a few years maybe, they can vote. But a French person who's been living here for 20 years and intends to live here for the rest of their life, they can't vote. That doesn't seem fair to me. But what I will notice is about 2023, Labour seemed to drop it. Now, I don't remember them specifically ruling it out. They just stopped talking about it. And it wasn't in the manifesto. However, I did notice yesterday in the urgent question, a Tory MP asked, oh, I might still have it actually. Hold on, let's see if I can find it. Here it is. Nick Timothy, Conservative MP, he asked this question. The Prime Minister has previously talked about extending the franchise to include additional foreign nationals. Remember, the Tories actually increased the number of foreign nationals who can vote in general elections. Remember that. Anyway, start again. The Prime Minister has previously talked about extending the franchise to include additional foreign nationals. Will the government take this opportunity to rule out ever extending the franchise to foreign nationals beyond existing rules? The Minister replied to that, the focus of this strategy is on eligible voters in this country. Now, note what she's saying and not saying there. First of all, she hasn't ruled it out. She's just said the focus of... So she said two things which don't rule it out. The first is the focus of this strategy. So there could be another strategy later on that gives the votes to EU citizens who've been here for 5 years or more, right? But she also said, so the focus of this strategy is on eligible voters in this country. She doesn't say currently eligible voters in this country. So, what's an eligible voter? An eligible voter is just what the law says is eligible. So let's say they did use this bill to change the law to allow EU nationals who'd been living here for 5 years or 10 years, whatever it is, some suitably committed period of time. So she hasn't ruled it out. They could do that. I'm not saying I think they will do that. But she didn't rule it out, and she could have done. She could have just said, the government is not looking to... She could have said, I can assure the right honourable, or the honourable gentleman in this case, sorry, that we are not looking at... And even that would have covered her. She could have just said, we have no plans to expand the franchise to additional foreign nationals. She didn't. So that's interesting. I'm not expecting a shock, but it is interesting. Brian, they're saying, based on my own experience of my own daughter, the biggest problem isn't who she'd vote for, it's getting her up, dressed and off to the polling station. This is often the case. A lot of young people, and again, it goes back to what I was saying about the fact young people... So they look at an election campaign and they go, well, where's the policies for me? And that's understandable. And the point I used to try and make to my students is there's lots of policies. Most serious parties have lots of policies. But they only have the bandwidth to get through maybe 5 big ones. Because if they try and explain all their policies, it all just gets lost in the noise. So they have to focus on like between 3 and 5 really key messages. And because young people don't vote in large numbers, or not, it's actually unfair to say, they don't vote in as large numbers as other groups, right? Most young people do still vote. Most young people vote. But I think it's around about 50%, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less. I can't remember what it was at the last election offhand. But it's about half. So, you know, it's not like no young people vote, or it's a tiny, it's about half, but it's not, older people, it's somewhere between like 70 and 80%, right? So, yeah. But again, going back to the earlier comment, if you've suddenly got an extra 2 years of young people, does that then maybe make it so that politicians, so they've got a range of policies, right? They might have 100 policies. They usually have more than 100 policies if you really break it down. But let's say you've got 100 policies, but you can only focus on 5. So what do you generally focus on? You focus on the ones for your key voters, which tends to be elderly people. So you need something in there about crime usually. You've got sort of older business owner types or people that are, a bit older but still working. So you may have something in there about the economy. You'll probably have something in there about education, but that's not for the kids, that's for the parents. You may have something in there about immigration, something like that, Does there come a point where the additional 2 years worth suddenly means that block of what you would call young people, because now it's not 18 to 24, it's 16 to 24. Does that potentially tip it over to the point where suddenly the policies that you have for younger people, it becomes worth it for the parties who have them? I mean, the Green Party, the Lib Dems, Labour, they all have policies specifically for young people. Does it become the case that all of a sudden it becomes more worthwhile ramping up the shouting on those ones? Maybe it might do. Business Cat saying no taxation without representation, as the US once put it. Yeah, except they lied though, didn't they? They lied. But yes, it's a good saying. Vince asking about Farage's partner is divorced. Oh, you mean his girlfriend now? I don't know anything about her. Like his wife, his ex-wife was German. I don't know about his current partner. He divorced his German wife, didn't he? My wife is gaining her citizenship after living here for most of her life just because the political landscape is looking bumpy all over the place. I mean, that's what, I would certainly suggest that if people don't mind, I mean, you can have dual citizenship. It's probably not a bad shout. If you intend to live here for the rest of your life, you may as well get the citizenship of the country. I mean, people move into Ireland. If you're British and you move to Ireland, you don't have any Irish heritage, you may as well, after a few years, apply for your Irish citizenship. You get an EU passport out of it. Brian, they say, my dad, like me, was a lifelong trade unionist Labour member, although he always got a lift to the polls with a Tory canvasser at nicer cars. Well, that's just what you do. You just encourage people to vote. If you encourage people to vote, serious political parties never lose out on that. James there saying Steve Colbert's show has been cancelled. 2026 series will be the last. Yeah, I saw on a WhatsApp today, Midas Touch have got in contact with him. He'll pop up somewhere. He'll still have a platform. Trump won't silence him this easily. I have to say I'm not very happy with Trump today. I mean, I know I'm not happy with Trump any day. He completely derailed my first video for today, which is out at 1 o'clock today, by backing down on the Epstein files. It's really annoying as well, because it shouldn't have happened. The video I was going to do on it was for last night originally, but because I ended up doing a much longer video on the electoral reform because of the urgent question in Parliament yesterday, I didn't have time for it. So I scheduled it for today. And then Trump backed down. He chickened out. Would you believe it? Trump chickened out against his own supporters this time. And then I looked at it and I thought, Christ, I haven't got enough time to redo it. So I did a hasty, you'll have to tell me how disjointed it is. Hopefully I get away with it. Because most of the video was still valid. So I basically kept the video as it was. I just top and tailed it to update with the latest news. But I'm not happy. They shouldn't do that. They shouldn't announce breaking news when I don't have enough time to change things. But anyway, going back to this one, Gareth, as I've said repeatedly, at 16 you can legally make the decision to have a baby, yet can't be trusted to walk to a polling station to put an X in a box. Well, this is exactly it. And there's various things as well that have been used for a long time. You can join the British Army. Some people, I've actually had a couple of people in the comments from the video yesterday going, oh, but you can't do that now. I said, yeah, you can. We just don't send you into the meat grinder until you're 18. So you won't be sent to war at 16, but you can join the British Army at 16. So you can join the British Army. You won't fight for your country unless we're invaded, but you can join the British Army. You can go into full-time work and therefore pay your taxes. But I mean, that's the thing as well. That was the interesting thing, going back to potentially migrant voters. So Keir Starmer said, justifying it, he said, look, they can basically, they work and pay their taxes, so why shouldn't they be able to vote? And it's like, what about migrant workers then? Because that's the thing. But at the same time, I do look at the fact that the minister, Rushanara Ali, yesterday was directly asked to rule out expanding the franchise to foreign nationals, and pointedly did not do so. In fact, she gave herself 2 loopholes in her answer. 2 massive loopholes to jump through. Now, it could be that Labour genuinely have no intention of doing this, and she knows it. But the fact that she wasn't clearly ruling it, and she could have ruled it out, the fact that she wasn't clearly ruling it out means Labour themselves privately are not ruling it out. So, could be interesting, could be interesting. It would add, if EU, I don't know how many EU citizens have been, because you wouldn't just say EU citizens living in the UK. You would have to have some period of time. Could be 5 years, could be 10 years, just to be on the safe side. Then you can always reduce it to 5 years maybe later on. So I would maybe do that if I was going to do it at all. If I was like a Labour policymaker, I would first of all check it out. Something they're not doing enough of these days. Bloody well check it out with polling. How would people react? But what I would say is, you know, there's millions. I don't know how many million. If you were to set it at 10 years, if they have to have been, first of all, they'd have to have settled status. That's fine, settled status, even though you don't need that to be for a Commonwealth citizen. So, but, you know, tentatively, if you just say you have to have settled status, and if you say something like you have to have been here for 10 years, that would still add a few million to the voting pool. Prior to they're saying Starmer did rule it out for this Parliament during the general election campaign. Oh, did he? I think it was the Rigby interview on Sky. Okay. I don't remember that then. Interesting. Okay. I don't remember that. Interesting then that the minister didn't rule it out. But anyway, as I say, I don't expect it. I'm not expecting a surprise, if I'm honest. Because to be honest with you, if they were planning on putting it in the bill, they could have just openly said they were putting it in the bill. Like, there's no harm in announcing it now as opposed to in like 3 months' time or something. Have you considered using recent election results in European countries to see how it could potentially go there? In terms of what? In terms of how European citizens would vote? No, we know that European citizens will by and large not vote for racist parties. So specifically xenophobic parties. So they're not likely to vote for the I mean, some will, of course, and some will vote for Reform UK. Most EU citizens, it can be taken as read, are not likely to vote for the Conservatives because the Conservatives are anti-EU, and they're not going to vote for Reform UK because Reform UK are very violently anti-EU, right? Remember, Reform UK do not want EU citizens in this country, so only so many would vote for them. It doesn't necessarily mean the vast majority would vote for Labour. Some might vote Lib Dem, some might vote Green, but they wouldn't vote Tory in Reform UK. And who are Labour's? Again, this is where you have to consider when you're looking at any sort of thing about electoral strategy. You must remember the system we're in. We're in a first past the post system, and we're in a system where Labour are not competing with everyone. In Scotland, they are very strongly competing with the SNP, so the SNP are a major consideration. In Wales, they are similarly competing with Plaid over basically the same voters, or many of the same voters. In England, which is where the vast majority of seats are, Labour are barely competing with the Green Party. That, I mean, it could change eventually, but at the moment they're not competing with the Green Party. The Green Party, too scattergun. They have no idea. They're, you know, Labour MPs constantly say, "Thank God the Greens are shit." But they're also not competing with the Lib Dems. They target mostly different seats. Very few seats where Labour and the Lib Dems actually compete with one another. Very few indeed. So Labour's competition is entirely the Conservatives and Reform UK. So they don't. So any change to the, and I'm not suggesting Labour are doing any of this stuff to favour themselves, because it's all justified. But any change that Labour make, which could benefit, say, the Green Party or the Lib Dems more than Labour, isn't a problem for Labour, because they're not competing with those parties to any great extent. They're competing with the Conservatives and Reform UK. So it's a bit like, tackling donations. They could go much further on tackling donations, because you could say, well, Labour also get big donations as well, but they don't get anywhere near as many as the Conservatives. So if Labour banned all donations above, say, £5,000 from an individual or an organisation, yeah, that will reduce Labour's donations, because they do get big donations as well. But it would hurt Reform UK and the Conservatives more, because they get more big donations. Well, Conservatives definitely. So that's the thing. And that's the thing about a first past the post system. You have to think in terms of net gains, not gains and losses, because you can lose from a policy, but it's a net gain if it hurts your competitors more than you. So I would be really going against not just foreign money in politics, all big money in politics. Don't allow any individual to donate more than £5,000 in a single year, single calendar year, or tax year. Tax year would be tidier. You could easily do that. No individual or organisation is allowed to donate more than £5,000 in a single tax year, and if an organisation donates up to £5,000 to a political party, then anyone who is registered as having a controlling interest is not allowed to themselves donate. So you can't do it twice. You can't donate through your business and yourself. I'd really go hard on it. Really go hard on it. The downside to that is Labour would have to stop taking donations from unions. But anyway, right, we've run out of time, so I'll go through the last few really quickly, because I've got to get ready for the stream with Graham on Politics Social at 1 o'clock. There's a massive right-wing psyop on Teen Boys through the gaming community, same as in the US. Yeah, there absolutely is. And it's been going on for some time. And it's not to say we shouldn't be concerned by it. What I'm saying is it's having no serious effect. You think it is, because it's more visible, but the numbers show that in the UK, there is literally no growth in the proportion of young people switching to the right wing. It's just not there. Like, look at this. 9% Conservative. This is 18 to 24-year-olds indeed. 9% Conservatives, 8% Reform UK at 17% in total. And this is at a time, remember, where Labour are actually really unpopular. It'll be even smaller proportion than that in a few years' time. I guarantee. I'm absolutely telling you. I get how young people do not see it, but quite a few of Labour's policies are benefiting young people. Come the next election, any young person on the minimum wage is going to get a lot more money, because they're getting rid of the age bands. So everyone on minimum wage, there'll be one minimum wage rate. That'll massively boost young people. Admittedly, yeah, you could argue it might make it harder for them to get a job because they're no longer cheap. Well, they are still cheap, but not as cheap. But those who have a job on minimum wage, they're quids in. The community centres are very much aimed at young people, particularly the mental health provision. You know, there's stuff coming online, I'm telling you. That percentage, I would be amazed if it's even as high as 17% collectively at the next election. But there we go. We will see. But anyway, we'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Thanks very much. Great conversation. Again, I'm still going to just make as my last point, just an appeal to anyone Labour. For goodness sake, look at today's front pages. It's all about the 16-year-olds, which is controversial. It's not about banning foreign donations, which is completely uncontroversial. Popular. The newspapers will never, ever, ever report on something, or at least prominently, that is popular that Labour are doing, because if it's universally popular, it's not controversial, doesn't sell papers. So they need to do it themselves. But thanks very much, everyone. Have a great rest of Friday. And until next time, I'll see you later.